Hello, everyone. I'm Beth, and this is Social Leopards. Are you a sibling? If you've ever wondered why your brother or sister is very different than you, even though you were part of the same family, this episode tackles one perspective of that mystery. It's a story about being the oldest daughter and how that shaped the way the author grew up and dealt with life as an adult. This week's featured contributor writes under the pen name of L, as in the letter L, and her newsletter is titled Letters from L. Her writing focuses on experiences and feelings. As the older of two children in my family, I can also relate to this one, and I'll be sharing my personal reflections a little later in this episode. And with that, let's dig into L's letter titled Eldest Daughter Syndrome, for those who grow up too soon, carried what no one saw, and need to learn, at last, to put it down. In the complicated web of family dynamics, the role of the eldest daughter often comes as a paradoxical blend, equal parts privilege and burden, applause and expectation. From a disquietingly young age, she is crammed into roles that are, by all reasonable standards, far too demanding for the still growing bones of a young girl. She becomes not just a caretaker, a mediator, or a role model, but also a surrogate parent, a therapist, a crisis manager, and the default translator of adult emotions into childlike action. She is the family's unofficial second-in-command, often its moral compass, sometimes even its emotional landfill. I call this silent inherited phenomenon Eldest Daughter Syndrome, a term that feels almost too clinical for what it is at its core, a deeply personal unraveling. It's not a diagnosis, but a condition of existence. You become the one who keeps things from falling apart, even when you're crumbling inside. And when the storm finally passes, because somehow you manage to calm it, they look at you with soft relief and say, "See, we told you it would all be okay." As if the okayness happened on its own, as if their survival wasn't built on the back of your effort, your self-abandonment, your invisible labor. They discredit the weight you carried by pretending it was never heavy. They forget that it only became okay because you made it okay, because you swallowed your own chaos to fix theirs, because you knew, without being told, that if you didn't step up, no one else would. And still, you keep going, because the eldest daughter doesn't stop. She recalibrates. She self-soothes. She puts the family back together piece by piece, but this phenomenon isn't loud or dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It lives in the in-between, the moments when she swallows her needs because there's already too much going on, when she gets praised for being so responsible, but no one notices how tired she always is. When her parents say, "We never had to worry about you," unaware that what they're really praising is her ability to suffer quietly, to drown in tears without making a sound. Over time, this cycle begins to shape her voice, her posture, her decisions, her ability to trust ease. The psychological architecture of the eldest daughter is not built solely by affection or discipline. It is carved almost entirely by expectation. Responsibility. Responsibility becomes her native language, spoken fluently, unquestioningly, long before she understands what boundaries are, long before she has the language to say no. It is handed to her not with ceremony or warning, but with quiet assumption. She's so mature for her age, they say, as if that's a compliment, as if it wasn't born out of necessity. As if it didn't mean that she learned to adapt to mayhem before she even understood what peace could feel like. The praise sounds like love, but it's a transaction. What they're really saying is, "You handled what we didn't know how to." It all begins so innocently. "Can you watch your little brother while I take a call? Can you be the example for your sister? Can you just be good for once and not make this harder than it already is?" These aren't requests, they're assignments, quietly stitched into the seams of her childhood. At first, she takes them on like a game, and responsibility feels like a prize, a way to win her parents' approval. But slowly, subtly, the game becomes life. The tasks get heavier. The margins for error shrink. She notices that when others fall apart, someone picks up the pieces. But when she falters, she is met by silence. The worst part is, no one tells her that responsibility, when not chosen but assigned, begins to erode you from the inside out. It hollows out the parts of you that once felt light. She starts to feel it in her body. Shoulders always tense, jaw clenched, sleep that never feels restful. She starts to feel it in her thoughts. Every decision running through a filter of, what will they need from me, instead of, what do I want? She wonders if she even knows what she wants anymore, if she ever really did. And the saddest, cruelest part is that by the time she realizes just how heavy it all is, everyone else has grown accustomed to her carrying it. Her reliability is no longer admired, it is expected. Her strength isn't seen as exceptional, it's the bare minimum. So she keeps going, not because she wants to, but because stopping would mean letting someone down. That's the quiet tragedy of it all. She doesn't break in some dramatic, cinematic collapse. She just keeps showing up, even as parts of her quietly disappear. She becomes so good at being who everyone needs her to be, she forgets who she ever was before the needing began. Responsibility was never the problem. The problem is that she was never allowed to put it down. But she keeps going, because for the eldest daughter, nothing is more unbearable than the thought of being a disappointment. Implications. The psychological toll of being the eldest daughter isn't always visible, but it is always present. When the room has cleared and the crisis is over, and she's left sitting with the ache of being everything for everyone and nothing for herself, over time, this constant shape-shifting, this performance of strength, starts to blur the edges of who she really is. And worse, it teaches her that her worth is conditional, earned only through utility, through sacrifice, through silence. Perfectionism often emerges as her armor, not because she wants to be perfect, but because she's terrified of what happens if she isn't. A single mistake doesn't feel like a mistake, it feels like a collapse, like letting everyone down, like confirming the fear she carries in the back of her mind that maybe love is earned only through excellence. So she overcompensates. She becomes hyper-aware, hyper-responsible, hyper-capable. She doesn't ask for help because she's convinced that needing anything makes her a burden. Instead, she folds herself into something digestible, predictable, helpful, good. However, goodness comes at a cost. It births anxiety that hums beneath everything, a background noise she learns to live with. She walks through the world with her fists clenched and shoulders tight, scanning every room for what might go wrong so she can preemptively fix it. Sleep doesn't come easily, not when her mind is a restless, looping checklist of everyone else's needs. Then there's the burnout, the bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of pause seems to ease. Because it's not just physical, it's existential. It's the kind of tired that comes from being hyper-independent for so long that asking for help feels like a foreign language. And when she does finally fall apart, because even the strongest do, it feels like betrayal, like weakness, like proof that maybe she wasn't as strong as they thought. And then the shame comes rushing in. Perhaps the most devastating consequence is the erosion of self. When you spend your formative years curating your identity to serve others, you grow up unsure of who you are. She might struggle to name her wants, her needs, her limits, because those were never things she had space to consider. And when she finally begins to want something for herself, it's accompanied by guilt. Self-prioritization feels unnatural, even selfish. She doesn't know how to take up space without apology. And yet, despite all of it, she rarely voices any of this. The psychological implications of eldest daughterhood are not always labeled as trauma, but they are a slow, steady undoing of innocence, a theft of calm, a legacy of emotional labor passed down like an heirloom, unwrapped too soon and worn too long. And perhaps the most unspoken truth of all is that she grieves a childhood she was never allowed to fully live, while still being expected to smile and say thank you for how responsible it made her. Breaking the cycle. There often comes a moment, quiet, most times lonely, when the eldest daughter realizes that no one is coming to save her, that the apology she's yearned for all these years may never arrive. Not out of cruelty, but because no one even realized she needed one. They saw strength where there was silence, independence where there was neglect. And so they never asked, never noticed, never thought to say, "We're sorry you had to grow up that fast." The weight she has carried will not lift itself. The years of self-sacrifice will not rewind. No one is coming to unpack what she's buried beneath her own resilience. And so once again, she is left with the impossible task she knows too well, to do it herself, to swim out of the water alone. And so she begins the lengthy, aching work of unlearning, of asking herself questions she's never had time to ask. What do I want? What do I feel? What are my limits? What if I said no and nothing fell apart? She learns that boundaries are not betrayals, that softness isn't weakness, that she does not have to earn rest or love or understanding. She learns that to break the cycle, she must pick up yet another responsibility, the responsibility to heal, to speak the truths that were never safe to say aloud. It means unraveling generational patterns with both maturity and confrontation. It means choosing not to pass down the same silences. And it means embracing the pain fully, without minimizing it, without explaining it away, and still moving forward. Because, once again, it is her. It is her voice that must rise above the silence, her hands that must untie what others left knotted, her heart that must stretch wide enough to hold grief and growth in the same breath. And it is beautifully devastating. The girl who held everything together must now do the work of holding herself, and as expected, she does. Not because she has to, but because somewhere deep within her she knows she was never meant to live her whole life for other people. She was meant to be free. And freedom, for the eldest daughter, begins with reclaiming the pieces of herself she buried to keep others afloat. She will not get the childhood back, but she can give herself what she was denied: empathy, safety, space. And maybe one day, when someone calls her strong, she'll smile. Not because she had to be, but because she finally chose to be for herself. The end. Okay. I'm the oldest daughter in my family. I have a younger brother, so some of what I just narrated feels like a letter I could have written to my own younger self, although I'm not sure I was really that self-aware enough to do that. More appropriately, this is a letter I wish someone had sent to me. I think about all those moments, quiet ones, loud ones, where reliability stopped feeling like a compliment and started feeling like a requirement. I've shared in the past that my mom had some recurring mental health issues, and there were times when she would be suffering, and it was kind of expected that I would pick up the slack. I held it together because the idea of letting others down was worrisome, and I considered my dad super busy, and so I had to do it instead of him. And I truly didn't want to be a source of disappointment. So, like the article says, it wasn't about dramatic breakdowns. It was about showing up every time, even when it was hard, even when I felt like pieces of myself were slipping away. The part about perfectionism being a kind of armor, oh, wow, that hit really close to home. Growing up, I was always considered the responsible one in the family, so a lot of that became my reason to be hyper-aware, ready to make sure things were handled if something felt, I don't know, off-kilter. My brother, in his own way, knew that I would handle things and pick up any of the slack that he left behind. But I'm not super sure he was as tuned into the dynamics of the household as I was. But strength, as Elle points out, comes at a cost. There's anxiety and exhaustion and tiredness that you can't shake off even after you think you got a good night's sleep. I have felt that kind of tired, the kind that makes asking for help seem almost impossible. Another part of this that really stuck with me is this idea of self-erasure. How over the years you curate your identity so carefully for others that you forget what you want for yourself. That is real. I have caught myself struggling to name my own needs, especially as a younger adult, because I spent a really long time prioritizing everyone else's. And when I finally wanted to do something for myself, I did feel guilty and I did feel selfish. And I felt like I was breaking some unwritten, unspoken rule of how to live life. Specifically, I can remember getting frustrated sometimes, especially after I turned about 15 or so, and really felt like I was ready to just leave and start living life independently. I had this inner rebel inside me. My best friend Joyce and I even hatched this whole plan to become independent, and we started planning about getting an apartment and living on our own. And we were going to do that the moment we both turned 16. In reality, I worked part-time for, I think it was back then, $2.85 an hour. And that would not have had a good outcome. But it was how the manifestation of the frustration came about. Reality isn't what stopped the plan. The guilt was what stopped us. We both knew our families needed us, and at the end of the day, that was the real reason we kind of talked on and on about it, but never really took action. And even as an adult, the first boy I fell in love with, he was someone who desperately needed me. And I picked right back up as the caregiver and the responsible one in that relationship. And that codependency eventually became our jam. And if we only knew then what we know now, right? But that's a topic for a whole different episode, so I'll leave it at that. I do love how the article shifts toward hope, toward unlearning, toward the idea that boundaries are not betrayals. It's taken me most of my adult life to learn that it's okay to say no, and that the world won't fall apart if I put myself first sometimes. Rest, love, understanding, those things shouldn't have to be earned by being useful. That's a tough lesson, but it's one I'm trying to live by. The truth is that no one did come to save me. Not because anyone was cruel in my story, but because they didn't realize I needed saving, just like Elle says. My brother and my parents, they saw independence, not the cost behind it. And so, referring back to this story, I'm the one who has to do the work to heal, to ask the hard questions, to break the silence, and to honor the pain instead of hiding it away. The work of healing is yet another responsibility, but this time, it's for me. It's about reclaiming pieces of myself, giving myself the empathy and the space I didn't get growing up. And maybe one day when someone calls me strong, I'll also feel that choice inside me. I just love the way that article ended because, I don't know, it made me smile and almost want to cry at both at the same time. So if you're listening and you're the oldest daughter too, or even if you just carry so much or too much responsibility for whatever reason, know that you're not alone. We're allowed to outgrow the boxes others put us in. We're allowed to take up space. And most importantly, we're allowed to be more than just strong. We're allowed to be whole. Thank you for sharing this time with me today. I'm grateful for everyone listening and for everyone learning to be gentle with themselves along the way. Be sure to check out Letters from Elle over on Substack.com. Of course, you'll find a link in the show notes. Before I end today's episode, I am excited to give you a little preview of what's happening next week. I'm going to be sharing a story from another somewhat anonymous creator who describes herself as just a girl with crippling social anxiety. She shares some of the ways she is able to recharge and cope with each passing week. It's a story of grace and self-care that you won't want to miss. Until next week, take care.